We see many types of sacrifices in the opening part of the game. Sacrifice that we perform in the opening, or you see be performed by other players, has to be based on few criterias. There is sacrifice as a part of a tactical shots, which leads to some kind of mating net or winning material or crushing attack. And there is a positional sacrifice. So when you sacrifice material, getting long-term advantages. For example, you sacrifice pawn and you get better development. So which means you have some kind of a dynamic compensation for it. And there is also positional sacrifice that based on not on development, based on weak squares and weaknesses of your in your opponent's position. So let's look at some different types of sacrifices in the opening. So actually this is going to help you a great deal, because when you develop your opening repertoire, so you can choose some openings based, and some openings they have to be contain some sacrifices, positional sacrifices. We are not talking about tactics, positional sacrifices. Well, let's get the example. Example one is the French defense, and the variation that I recommend actually to play for white is in the well-known Nimzovich variation of French defense, c5 in this position. We know there are several moves, and the main move in this position is a3 for white. But move that I worked a lot, that it doesn't exist in the theory, is bishop to d2. This is strictly positional move, and in some cases, it depends how game develops, we do sacrifice a pawn. And if we don't sacrifice a pawn, we get some other advantages. We sacrifice pawn based on the way black plays. Now, we are not going to go to all details of the opening, because the idea of this tape is not analyze French defense, to show you the sample of positional sacrifice. The best move recommended by theory is knight to e7, then we go knight to b5, bishop takes d2 check, we play queen takes d2, and now black tries to prevent knight d6 check by castling. f4 is the best move for white. And this is interesting that in this opening, in next two moves, we can find two different ways, two different positional sacrifices. In one of them, black sacrifices the pawn. In the other one, white sacrifices the pawn. So in the case where black sacrifices the pawn, I will not recommend you to accept this sacrifice. And in the case where white sacrifices the pawn, we have also very good compensation. So both pawn sacrifices, they are very well justified. Case 1, when black plays knight c6, white can take pawn on c5 and keep it. Black will have no way of getting this pawn back. But the reason why I will not recommend that is this. Now black is going to play b6, and white practically forced to take on b6, because if white doesn't take on b6, then black is going to take on on c5, and then black has a very strong position in the center. So if white takes on b6, then queen takes to b6, and that's what black sacrificed pawn for. Now let's talk about this position. This is 100% positional sacrifice. The bad bishop that black had like 2-3 moves ago will be a good bishop after black plays bishop a6. But the main concern for white here is what are they going to do with their king? What can white do with the king? What can white do? So the threat simply is a6, and if knight goes back somewhere, then queen takes on b2, and black gets their pawn back, and black is far ahead in development. So white has some ways to keep this extra pawn. One of them is a castle, and then black plays bishop a6. And just to show you, we are not going to go in all details of this position. I'm telling you, black plays next move rook b8, followed by rook f to c8. Black has tremendous attacking position. This is very bad for white. The other way, if white decides not to castle queenside, in this case they have to castle kingside, but that's far, far away from the white, far away from achieving it. So then they have to go c3 to prepare knight to go to d4. Then they have to play knight f3. Then they have to develop the bishop, and then they have to castle. This is 4-5 moves away, and this is not going to happen. After move c3, black can simply go bishop d7 or bishop a6. And after knight d4, simply bishop takes f1. And there will be no castle for white. And if king takes f1, now black can totally annihilate white's king position. f6, and you see that white is literally falling apart here. So the pawn sacrifice that black played should not be accepted by white. After knight c6, this is the position. D takes c is a really bad move. So the correct move is knight, the bishop on f1, and knight f3 is the correct move. Now it's white's turn to sacrifice the pawn. Black can go a6, and white must go knight d6, and now black takes on d4. C takes d. Now, you can say that white can simply take on d4. That's true. White can take on d4, and the pawns will be even. But white will have zero advantage. Actually, white will have bad position, because knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and all of a sudden we're going to find out that white's pride, which is knight on d6, is not placed very well. Knight c6, queen will go back, and f6. So black breaks through and attacks white knight's support, which is pawn on e5. This is bad position for white. They are behind in development. They cannot castle, so they will be forced to play knight takes c8. Now imagine what happened here. white knight that was on g1 originally played knight f3, knight d4, knight b5, knight d6, and knight takes c8. So it made 5 moves to eliminate the bad bishop that is never moved. And this is not something can be recommended. And after rook takes c8, black has beautiful position. So this is the reason why white should not take the pawn on d4. So what should white play now is bishop d3, continue development. And white treats these double pawns on d5 and d4 as shield. So they want to quickly castle king side. For example, if on f6, they castle king side, and white will try to organize attack on black's king side. To give you a little taste of the variation, let's go through this. Pawn takes e5, pawn takes e5. And I'm going to give you quickly 2 possible variations. There is actually opening theory recommends them for black, and they say black is doing fine in both cases. And actually black is not doing fine, is neither of those cases. Quickly, 2 possibilities. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and I did mention it in one of my tapes that called in a blue series. Whoever follows my tapes, called Crushing Lines, I mentioned it. But I added, since then, I added one more line. Queen takes d6, rook takes f8, king takes f8, rook f, or queen f4 check, king g8, actually rook f1 check, king g8, queen f4. Now white is threatening mate, knight f5, pawn g4, knight h6, queen g5. And white has a threat of playing rook f6, followed by rook takes h6. And black does not have any defense here. And as I said, this is not, I'm not here showing you and teaching you certain opening. I'm showing you just the basis for positional sacrifice. And the other line also, rook takes f3. And now theory says that black has a good position, and the variation then give rook takes f3, knight takes e5, rook h3, queen takes d6, bishop takes h7, king f8, then black's king escapes to the queen side, and black is doing fine. Well, I agree with that, except I do not agree with the way white was playing it. This position is good for white, and after rook takes f3, we have to play rook takes f3, and on knight takes e5, very powerful move, queen f4. Now, obviously, black cannot take knight on d6 because of the queen f8 mate. So what black has to do is black has to take white's knight on f3, and then pawn takes f3. And now white is 2 pawns down, but has a very, very strong position. Notice, just I guide you quickly through this position. The threat is queen f7 check, king h8, and queen h5 with very powerful double threat, which is queen takes h7 mate or knight f7 winning the queen. So black has some ways to defend. So one of them is bishop f5, knight f5, bishop takes f5, pawn takes f5. And this is very, very strong position for white. They have very strong knight and queen on f4, and rook comes into the game. One of two possible variations. White can go rook e1 or very tricky move king h1. This is kind of additional analysis of the position that is very good for white. And on queen f6, for instance, we can go knight e8, and after queen f7, knight takes g7, knight sacrifice, just wins the game. We see if queen takes g7, then rook g1, and if king takes g7, then rook g1 check wins black's queen in every variation. Variation 1 is on king f6, they go queen h6 check. And now on king e5, rook e1 is a checkmate. And on king e7, rook g7, winning queen. And if king goes to f8, then there is queen d6 check, winning the queen anyway, because on queen e7 we go rook g8 check, and on king e8 rook e1 check. So this is winning, but this is already, we went in a deep analysis. The way you see the positional compensation, just to look at this position. This is the position as a result of our positional sacrifice. Are we really 2 pawns down? No, we're not really 2 pawns down, because d4 pawn of blacks is very weak. And what we have very strong knight on d6 and queen on f4, and our rook is ready to participate immediately and be activated on only open file on the board, which is e1. So, or also the other possibility, as I just mentioned, king h1 and rook to g1, trying for direct attack on black's king. So in both cases, white has a good position. And to mention, after rook e1, with threatening rook e8, and if black goes bishop d7, white can get already one of their pawns back, still keeping the positional pressure. And now the second pawn on d5 is hanging. So it's not really 2 pawn sacrifice. Black does have 2 pawns, but they definitely cannot keep them both. This is like a variety of 2 different pawn sacrifices, and we see that they can happen for both sides. You see how quickly black can get in danger if they accept pawn sacrifice, and the white could have gotten in trouble if they accepted black's pawn sacrifice. Now, both of those sacrifices, obviously, they are not based on some concrete analysis. They are not based on some tactics, flashing tactics or something. They are based on positional values. And positional values and the concrete variations that we just looked at, they just prove this point and prove our evaluations. So let's look at different type of sacrifice, also the long-term sacrifice. Well, we're going to go to one of the variations of King's Gambit. Actually, King's Gambit is the opening when you see all different kinds of pawn sacrifices for both sides, for black or white. Now, one of the popular variations of King's Gambit is the fianchetto variation for white. And let's look at the one variation, d6, bishop g2, c6, castles, queen a5, and there are two main moves in this position. One is h3, probably the most popular move, and the other one is e4. On e4, black goes bishop g4, and it's a long theory on this. We're not going to go in details on that. But on h3, black goes bishop e6, and now the best move for white is d5, c takes d5, knight to d4. Obviously, white cannot just take on d5, because after knight takes d5, black wins a pawn. So what they do is, white goes knight to d4. What they do, now they're putting another hit on a d5 pawn, since they think d5 pawn is pinned, because if black takes on c4, then bishop takes b7, winning rook on a8. Well, what black, I believe, should do, the main theoretical move is bishop d7 here, but what I like is d takes c and sacrificing that rook. Bishop takes b7, now we have to play knight d7. And what white wins actually is not a rook, it's an exchange. So they can take the rook, we have to take back. Now it's a good idea for them to take the bishop on e6, we take back. Let's talk about this position. This is 100% positional sacrifice. There are no concrete variations. There was, I remember, I looked at a very powerful game played by woman chess player Pia Kramling from Sweden against one of the best players in the world years ago, Lajos Portis, Hungarian, and black won a very powerful game. Here, let's evaluate this position. White's king position is weakened by pawns on g3 and h3. Black has very powerful presence, pawn presence in the center. They can go d5, they have b file, their pawns can move. So they have very mobile pawn center. And the material is, it's a pawn's worth of a sacrifice. So black has knight and a pawn for a rook. Well, correct evaluation of rook is a knight and two pawns maybe, but here black has knight and one pawn and plus more than one pawn's worth of positional values. So they can go queen h5 and try to attack on the king side, or play d5, knight c5, and try to put pressure on queen side. And again, the purpose of our lesson now is not to look at all the opening variations. This is just the types of positional sacrifice. It's a long-term sacrifice that I widely would recommend for black, and I really like for black. Actually, not too long ago, I watched the game in progress, when it was in progress, between one of the leading American grandmasters, Shabalov, who was playing white against Eugene Perlstein, who is my student, and black was totally winning. Black practically won the game. Game ended with black's blunder, which resulted to a draw, but black was totally winning this game. So this position, black, you see that you have positional values that will compensate the minimal material deficit of one pawn, of a value of one pawn. So this position is good and positional sacrifice worked. So let's look at one interesting position and one interesting game that came after the opening. It was way past the opening stage, but it was positional sacrifice. You can tell that it's from the position right after the opening. So it was played by Tal, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. It's a well-known variation of Ruy Lopez. Knight f6, castle, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, d6, c3, castles, h3, h6, d4, rook e8, knight bd2. This is more or less standard moves. Bishop f8, knight f1, bishop d7, knight g3, knight a5, bishop c2, c5, and white plays b3, g6. The idea of move g6 to prevent white's knight from coming to f5. So g6 was played, bishop e3, and here after knight c6, d5, knight e7, queen d2, attacking h6 pawn, king h7. In this position, white sacrificed a piece. They got only 2 pawns for it. But we see that positional piece is not worth 2 pawns. It's worth a lot more than 2 pawns. 3 pawns normally, but in most of the middle game position, it's worth even more. So the way Tal justified this sacrifice, he played bishop takes c5 in this position, d takes c, and knight takes e5. Now, white got only 2 pawns for a piece. White also attacks the f7 square. Well, black played interesting move, knight c8, attacking white's knight, and white cannot take pawn on f7 because they're going to lose second piece. Knight on f7 is trapped. But of course, the piece sacrifice had much deeper evaluation. So f4, much deeper ideas. So f4 was the move. Now white supports the knight, and they have eventually this e5 knight will move back, and this pawn center will start moving forward, and white has very, very powerful position. At the same time, you can notice that black's pieces are kind of clumsy. Knight does not belong on c8, bishop is on f8, and bishop on d7. This knight on f6 will be pushed away by playing e5. What happened after knight takes e5, knight c8, f4, queen e7, black protects the f7 pawn. Now white played c4, and what happened later in the game, white just removed the knight to f3, played e5, and got totally winning position. Black is totally pushed to the edge of the board, and white won the game. This is 100% positional sacrifice. So this is the type of sacrifices you should look. When you analyze some position, you look for some values, you look for some sacrifices. As I said, sacrifice of a pawn, piece, or whatever material does not always has to be proved or justified by concrete variations. It can be justified with positional values. So next example I want to see here, we're going to go to start position. Now, how do people come up with these ideas? They don't analyze. Well, computers can do that. They can go through every move and calculate every variation, millions of variations in a second, then they will see which one they like. We don't have these capabilities. And so they have intuition. All this based on intuition. Remember about maybe 60, 70 years ago, in the Marshall and Capablanca era, there was created a gambit in Ruy Lopez, probably most of you know as a Marshall gambit, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, b5, or bishop e7, which is transposition, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, castle, c3. Now you will see that d6 move is one of the main moves, probably the main move, and d5 is a pawn sacrifice, which called Marshall attack, and it's played even to our days, even this year, last year, it's still alive and playing. This is the pawn sacrifice. When Marshall invented it, and he played many games with it, and this opening has many different ways black can play. Black has certain compensation for a pawn. E takes d, knight takes d5, knight takes e5. That's a pawn sacrifice. Knight takes, and rook takes e5. Now this is the key position of Marshall attack. Now this is positional sacrifice. This is not based on black just sweeping white's position away and they just have mating attack. No, it's positional. It was played for years by Spassky, by some top players in the world, even in our days. So there are two ways to continue for black. To go knight f6, followed by bishop d6, and when rook moves, knight g4 and queen h4. That's how Marshall was playing, actually. And later, in the later years, they started playing c6, supporting the knight, which was hanging, and then going bishop d6 and trying to organize direct attack on king's position. So this is positional sacrifice. Again, we are not going to talk about the value of this opening, but what I'm trying to tell you, if you come across some position, it's very, very helpful. I did it myself. I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours researching some positional sacrifice in the opening and creating innovations, and it was a lot of fun. It's very helpful and extremely beneficial when you play. When you yourself invent some of those sacrifices, or in order to invent something on your own, of course, first you have to know whatever exists there, because you may be discovering something that's already discovered a long time ago. They've been discovered a long time ago. So this is just one of the examples. That's what can happen. The Marshall, he had a good chess intuition, so his discovery was based only on intuition and only on positional long-term values. Now we're going to go back and see, even in nowadays, I remember for many, many years, or maybe I think it started even in maybe 40 years ago, maybe even earlier. One of the most popular, probably the most popular variation of Sicilian defense is Najdorf variation. Knight f6, knight c3, a6. This is Najdorf variation, one of the sharpest variation of Sicilian. And in this sharpest variation of Sicilian, there is the sharpest variation of this variation, which is bishop g5, e6, f4, and now queen b6. Of course, now attacking b2 pawn, of course, white can play knight b3, but then when black plays queen e3 check and white plays queen e2, this is simple position, and white hardly has any advantage here. But the most competitive move for white here is queen d2, queen d2, queen takes b2, rook b1, and queen a3. This is the positional pawn sacrifice. Black made queen b6, queen b2, queen a3, 3 moves with a queen, and they are obviously behind in development. And there are many, many sharp variations. It took the best players in the world decades to analyze it, and they still haven't come to any conclusion. I remember this variation was played by Fischer. Fischer was playing it from both sides. He was playing it for white, he was playing it for black. He played in world championship matches, and he played in any international events. And he wouldn't mind this position from both sides because the diagnoses were inconclusive. So we don't know. White has certain compensation, and black has certain ways to defend position. And again, we are not going to go through this now, but I'm telling you, this is the long-term compensation. This is something is very, very good to play for both sides, because when you play for white, you're going to learn the value of initiative. And if you played bad, you lost, you sacrificed pawn, you figure what you did wrong, or get some help on analyzing this position with your program, computer program or something. Maybe you're going to get some help. But it's very good to evaluate positional sacrifices. Okay, now we're going to have, I want to attract to your attention to different kind positional sacrifice. Positional sacrifice that can be performed in a very early stage of the game. For example, move 2, move 3. Well, e4, e5, and now if white goes d4, ed, c3. This is one of the positional sacrifice. It's called either North Gambit or Central Gambit. It depends after dc what white plays. They play knight takes c3, or they play maybe even bishop c4, giving another pawn on b2. So this is one of the early stage sacrifice. This is also a good way to learn about initiative. Well, of course, on the other hand, if black does not want to accept this sacrifice, they can go d5, ed, queen takes d5, and cd. But this is different. This is completely different position. There is no sacrifice happen. Black did not accept the sacrifice. So I am not pro early sacrifice in the opening, like move 2. I want to see that I get some real positional good compensation for it. e4, c5, very interesting, and was popular for quite a number of years, Sicilian gambit. d4, c takes d, c3, d takes c, and knight takes c3. Now, this is the gambit that was widely analyzed. Now, let's look at this position and whether we want to accept it, this sacrifice, whether we want to accept this for white to play this position, and whether we want to accept the sacrifice for black. Let's evaluate this position without going to any further analysis. This is position after 3 moves only. White is 1 tempo ahead in development. Black has 0 weaknesses. Black is going to develop knight c6, d6, e6, knight f6, and bishop e7. White is going to be always a little bit ahead in development. Is it worth central pawn? Well, if you had to evaluate, if you had to give some answer, of course there is always, I'm not sure, I don't know answer. But if your test does not accept I don't know answer, it's something like you play the game and, well, what is the best move? I don't know. You still have to make a move. So should you do it or not? Well, I wouldn't do it because I don't think central pawn is worth half a tempo in this variation, in this case. So I don't think we should do that because this belongs to the category of provocative sacrifices, and this is not something I would recommend. I could recommend. And again, we can start analyzing this opening and take 3-4 hours or 5 hours on this because, well, it's just fair. If we want to analyze it, we need about 5 hours because other people took hundreds of hours. So we're not going to go through this. But that's how you choose. You don't want to put hundreds of hours in analyzing this position and then decide, no, I don't want to do it. Then you have a lot of wasted time in your hands. So what you do is you evaluate it, you use your intuition. Is that something I want to do? Oh, I like it. I like what I get. And now I will spend my time, and it's going to be good investment of a time. Let's do it. Let's go. That's how you decide. Now, let's look at another sacrifice. This is very, very positional sacrifice on development. E4, this is actually a good example of how positional advantage in development can be explored. E4, E6, D4, D5. It's a French defense, one of the variations. Knight D2, C5, Knight F3, and here Knight C6. This is all opening position. D takes E, Knight takes E4, Queen A5 check. No, Bishop D7 first. Bishop D7, Bishop G5, Queen A5 check, Knight C3, White must play Knight C3 to protect the bishop on B5, Knight C3, C takes D, and Knight takes D4. Now Black plays Bishop B4, White castles. Now this game was played between 2 grandmasters. After castle, bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3. White has broken pawn structure, but white is ahead in development. White is ahead in development, and, which is more important, black's dark squares are weak. You see, black is missing dark square bishop. In this position, a player with black who is a very strong grandmaster, he obviously we don't have to explain him, and he does not have to be thought to make too many moves with the same piece in the opening is not a good idea, and also developing queen in early stage is not a good idea. But he violated this rule for a concrete reason. He played in this position queen takes c3 because he wanted to dislodge the d4 knight. Now he is attacking the d4 knight. And here white must take advantage of their development. Development, as we know, it's always dynamic factor because there is a bad piece. For example, if piece is locked in your pawn structure, then it's static advantage. But dynamic, when you're developed, that means dynamic is matter of timing and tempos. And here, if white simply removes the knight and black keeps developing, they're going to eliminate this dynamic advantage. So, and then white will have nothing. And now, after queen takes c3, white is a pawn down. And also black wants to develop. Knight e7 next move, and knight is hanging. Move chosen by white is extremely powerful. Knight f5, pawn takes, rook e1 check. Well, we can see that knight takes e7 is not acceptable because white simply can take on e7 with a rook and then play queen takes d7 and then also take on e7 the knight would check. So black's response is practically forced, which is bishop e6, and now white plays queen d6. Now let's look at this position. Black cannot continue development. Black cannot play knight e7 because queen takes e7 is a simply checkmate because knight on c6 is pinned. And for the same reason they cannot go to h6. So after queen d6, black plays a6, attacking the bishop on b5 because black wants to unpin c6 knight. White plays bishop d2. Now this is enormously powerful move. After bishop d2, queen is attacked. Queen takes c2, queen has to move. And now bishop to b4. This is taking advantage of the dark squares and creating some critical threats. Pawn takes bishop b5. Now it's 2 extra pieces for black. But after queen f8, king d7, rook a2 d1 check, king c7, queen takes a8, material is even and black is hopelessly lost. Well, right now we are threatening bishop d6, maybe bishop a5. Knight takes b4 is bad because rook c1 wins the queen, and black's position is hopelessly lost. Now, I can assure you that when white sacrificed this knight f5, or especially when they sacrificed the pawn on c3, they haven't seen any of it. But what motivated them is the understanding and intuition that black is not developed and dark squares are very sensitive. And after queen takes c3 and knight f5, they are opening the position, black's position, before black concludes development. Before they finish development, after ef, rook e1, there is no rook e1, bishop e6 is forced in queen d6. There is no way black can save this position. And that's why, well, rook a1 to d1 is the next move. For instance, if they play knight f6, I'm going to show you one variation, rook d1. What is black's next move? Maybe they can play knight e4? No, that's not possible because queen d8 is a checkmate. It's a checkmate. Rook takes d8 and rook takes d8. You see, the knight is pinned on c6, so it's a checkmate. Well, I don't have to mention that you cannot castle while you are in check, because if you don't know that, then you will have great difficulties understanding anything I said on this tape. Okay, so then, so the powerful sacrifice knight on f5 didn't come out of nowhere. It came, white has all the positional basis for it. It's well timed, well executed, and perfectly perfectly executed and well thought. So these are good examples of positional sacrifice in the opening. So that's why I recommend you to use these values to work on the opening repertoire and keep this in mind. Thank you very much.